Okay, so the plan for today is to build a vintage styled chronograph watch inspired by my favourite cars of the past. What is up everyone, I'm Jason from jb.watchmods, welcome back to the channel. Now today I'm building a watch inspired by some of my favourite cars from the past, more specifically the Porsche 911. So I was scrolling the internet looking for watches that kind of fit that design brief, and I came across the Porsche design Chronograph 1. Now I'll pop a picture up of that watch here. And that watch really caught my eye. It was pretty much exactly what I was after until I saw the price tag, which is what gave me the idea to come up with something similar at 1/100th of the cost. So here's what I'm using. So the case that I'm using is a 40mm chronograph case. Now it's got a domed mineral crystal and aluminium bezel insert, and I like this because both of these features hark back to an earlier time. Now the case has a brushed finish, which is actually a titanium coating, and it comes on a grey silicone strap, but we won't be needing that. Now the dial we're using is a simple black dial with 2 subdials and white lettering. Now I've applied my own logo to this dial, and if you want to see how I do that, I have a full video over on my Patreon page, which I'll link in the video description. Now the heart of this watch is a Seiko VK64 movement, which is a chronograph movement and has 2 subdials. The subdial at 3 o'clock is a 24-hour counter, and the subdial at 9 o'clock is a 60-minute timer for the chronograph. And finally, the hands that we're using. I've combined 2 different sets of hands to come up with the one set that we have here. I think that orange second hand adds a nice pop of colour, similar to the gauges on a dash of an old 911 Porsche. Now I've gone with a dark brown perforated leather watch strap, which is also inspired by the cars and races of that generation. So hopefully this all comes together nicely and I have an awesome looking watch for a fraction of the price. So let's jump into it. Okay, so let's kick this build off by grabbing our dial. Now this dial started life as a 32.5mm dial, but the case we're using only accepts 31.5mm dials, which is why you can see the brass edge on the outside of the dial. What I had to do was file a millimeter off the outside of this dial so it would fit into the case that I'm using. And I did this by using a small grinding stone attachment on the end of my Dremel and made my way around the dial until it fit into the case that I'm using. I'll leave a link in the description of this video to another video where I used the same method. So here I've just fitted the dial to the movement, which is just a press fit. And now I'm turning the movement over until the date changes. Once that date changes, I know we're at 12 o'clock and I can set the hands accordingly. So first up is our hour hand. Now unfortunately I don't have a movement holder for this movement that fits into my hand press, so I'm going to be doing this one freehand. So because we know we're at 12 AM on the movement as the date wheel has just changed over, we're going to set both of our hour hand and minute hands directly at 12 o'clock. This way we know that when the time reaches 12 AM our date should change over automatically. And here I'm using Rotoco to hold the hand, which is basically a jeweler's blue tack. Now, if you do buy Rotoco, make sure you buy genuine, good quality Rotoco, as the cheap stuff is usually really hard and leaves residue on anything that it touches. Genuine Rotoco is soft, malleable, and is great for cleaning hands and dials. So now that I've got both the hour and minute hand pressed on, I'm going to rotate the movement over and just make sure that those hands clear everything. And we want to make sure that that date changes at 12 o'clock. Now on this dial in particular, the subdial rings sit fairly high, which doesn't leave the hour hand a lot of space, so it's something to look out for when you're using this dial. So now we'll move on to the subdials, and we're going to start with a 24-hour counter at the 3 o'clock position. So when fitting this hand, make sure that both hands are at the 12 AM position. That way when you fit the subdial hand at the 12 o'clock position, all of the hands will be in sync. Then we can rotate the movement once again just to make sure that all the hands are timed correctly. Now we can move on to the subdial at the 9 o'clock position, and this is a 60-minute counter for the chronograph feature of this movement. Now, before fitting this hand, I should have reset the chronograph just to make sure that we are setting the hand in the correct position. Now luckily it turns out the chronograph was in the correct position, but if you are going to build this watch, I would definitely recommend resetting the chronograph before fitting that subdial hand, which we are now about to do. So now I'm going to move the hands to a roughly 10 and 2 position. I'm doing this because we're about to fit the running seconds hand for the chronograph. Now this can be notoriously difficult to line up directly at 12 o'clock, so I find that moving the hands out of the way gives me a little bit of a clearer view to line that hand up directly over 12 o'clock. Now here is another little blunder that I made. I started the chronograph and then immediately reset it. What I should have done is started the chronograph, then stopped it and then reset it. Now in the end it didn't make a difference, but it's probably not the best way to do it. I'm not sure what I was doing today. It seems that I made mistake after mistake. But I guess that's what happens when I haven't built one of these for a while. So now that we've got all of the hands pressed on, let's start this chronograph and then reset it just to make sure that the chronograph runs and that it resets back to the right position. Now, here's a question you may be wondering, as I was too. According to ChatGPT, the VK64 does not have a running seconds hand, which is a little bit weird and I didn't know before starting this build. It's supposed to give the watch a cleaner, more vintage inspired look. And looking back on it, that is exactly why I went for this dial using this movement. I feel like it fits that vintage race car vibe perfectly. I just assumed that the subdial at 9 o'clock was the running seconds hand. But not to worry, I'm not too fussed. Anyway, now I've just removed our crown stem and we can get ready to fit the movement into our case. So first, let's remove the case back. Once we've got our case back removed, it's time to clean the crystal. And to do this, I use my trusty lens pen and air blower, making sure to remove all smudges, dust and debris, as we want this watch to look as good as we possibly can once it's all assembled. And once that crystal is, well, crystal clean, we can fit the case over the movement. And you can see that the brass edge of the dial is completely covered once we get it into the case. Now this case uses a movement spacer, which helps to keep the movement nice and snug inside the case. So now is the time to fit that. And you can see there are 3 cutouts in the side of this movement spacer, and they are for the pushers and the crown stem. So just make sure that those cutouts are lined up correctly in the case, and it should press down without too much difficulty. Now the case I'm using is from a previous build, so I already have the crown stem cut to length and fitted to the crown. But if you want to see me do this, I'll leave a video link in the description below where I go more in depth in this process. But now that the crown is fitted, I'm still going to double check that the crown operates as it should, by making sure that I can select all 3 positions and that the crown screws fully into the case. So now let's grab our case back, and before we can fit this to the case, we're going to lubricate the case back gasket. And we'll do this by popping it into a container of silicone grease. Then we can refit our gasket, which on this case is located on the case back gasket itself. But be careful, as some cases have the case back gasket installed on the case. Then we can screw this case back down and our watch assembly is complete, and we can move on to the final step, which is our watch strap. Now, before we get too excited about being finished, there is one thing on these straps that I want to change, and that is the buckle. Now, when I purchased the watch case, it came on a grey silicone strap, and that strap had a buckle that matched the finish of the case. The strap that I want to fit to this watch, that brown vintage inspired leather strap, has a polished buckle which won't match the case. So I'm going to swap the buckles over just to keep that cohesive look, and I think it's a nice little touch. It's a fairly straightforward task, and it's actually similar to fitting the strap to the case. There's a small spring bar that runs through the strap and locates into each side of the buckle. all you need to do is pull down one side of the strap, pop that spring bar out, and the buckle and pin should come out nice and easily. Then it's just a matter of swapping in the new one. Easy as that. And there we have it. I think it looks great and matches that case nicely. Now, all we have left to do is fit the strap to the case. Now, these straps came fitted with quick release spring bars, and usually I'm a big fan. But to be honest, the quality of these spring bars was fairly poor, and I couldn't trust them to stay in the case. They were a little bit short and didn't really have a lot of tension. So I swapped them out for some standard spring bars, which in this case do a lot better job. So now we are just about done with this build, and I cannot wait to see how this watch looks. Now, in the meantime, if you want to pick one of these watches up for yourself, I will have them for sale over on my website, which is linked in the video description below. Or if you want to build one for yourself, I'll leave all the links to the parts as well. But for now, let's run that B-roll and see how this watch looks. And that is going to do it for today's build. I would love to hear in the comment section below how you guys think I went putting together my own watch inspired by that vintage era of racing and cars. Personally, I am really happy with how the watch came out, and I think it nailed that design brief pretty accurately. Now, if you've liked the video or gotten anything out of it at all, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all in the next video.